A man was driving slowly through a crowded city street, the kind of street where life never really stops. The honking of cars, the rush of people, the vendors calling out to customers, it was a regular day that felt just like all the others. But as he sat behind the wheel, waiting for the traffic light to turn green, something happened that he would never forget. A frail hand, shaking with weakness, reached up and tapped gently against his car window. The sound was barely audible over the noise of the city, yet it pierced through the chaos and reached his heart. He turned his head, and there she was. A woman, thin and weary, stood outside. Her clothes were worn out, her hair tangled, and her eyes looked tired as though they had not seen a good night's sleep in years. In that moment, she was just another beggar on the street, one of countless souls who lived on the margins, hoping for a coin or a scrap of food. The man, Daniel, instinctively reached into his pocket. After all, how many times had he done this before? A small gesture of charity, a quick exchange, and then the light would change and life would go on. But this time was different. When he rolled down the window and finally lifted his gaze to meet hers, his entire body froze. His heart stopped for a second, his breath caught in his throat, and time itself seemed to hesitate. Those eyes, those brown eyes staring back at him, they weren't the eyes of a stranger. They weren't the eyes of someone he had never met. No, they were familiar. They belonged to someone from his past, someone who had once been a part of his very soul. The recognition hit him so hard it was almost painful. His world, which had been moving at the rhythm of an ordinary day, suddenly changed forever. At first his mind refused to believe it. Surely it couldn't be her. How could this broken figure, standing in the cold, be the same person he remembered? The memories flashed back against his will, afternoons spent running in fields, laughter echoing through classrooms, promises whispered under the shade of old trees. He remembered smiles, shared secrets, dreams spoken with the innocence of childhood. Could it really be her? And if it was, what had life done to her? The scene was heavy with silence, despite the noise of the city. He wanted to say something, but the words wouldn't come. He wanted to ask how this had happened, but he knew this was not the moment. What mattered now wasn't the past, but the present. This was not just another beggar. This was someone he once cared for deeply, someone he thought he had lost forever. And now, by some twist of fate, here she was, standing at his car window, her hand still trembling, her face still waiting for an answer. The story pulls us in because it reminds us of how fragile life is, how quickly things can change, and how easily we can forget the people who once meant the most to us. The man could have ignored the knock. He could have tossed a few coins and driven away, leaving her behind in the blur of the city. But in that instant of recognition, he realized something far greater was at stake. This was not about charity anymore. This was about connection, about humanity, about a bond that had been buried by time but never truly broken. This is why the story begins with such a powerful hook. A simple gesture, opening a car window to a beggar, is something we might see every day and think little of. Yet within that ordinary act lies the potential for extraordinary moments. It is in these unexpected encounters that life often reveals its deepest truths. The narrator's words, "His world stopped," capture that exact feeling. That moment when the ordinary dissolves into the extraordinary, and the heart recognizes something the eyes can barely believe. And just as the man's life shifted in that second, the story shifts for us, the viewers. We are reminded that kindness, compassion, and recognition of others are not small things. They are world-changing things. The video asks us to pause and think, how many times have we ignored the tap at the window, the voice asking for help, the eyes that plead for acknowledgement? How many lives could we touch if we simply stopped and opened not just our window, but also our hearts? That is why the narrator reaches out directly to the audience, urging them to like the video and subscribe to The Kind World. Because stories like these are not just meant to be heard, they are meant to be shared so that more people can be reminded of the power of compassion. By supporting the channel, viewers aren't just following another page. They are joining a community built on empathy, humanity, and the belief that kindness is not dead. The opening scene does more than just introduce a story. It forces us to see beyond the surface, to look deeper into the faces around us, and to realize that everyone has a story. Everyone carries memories. And sometimes the stranger at your window is not a stranger at all. It is an emotional call to awareness, and a powerful reminder that the choices we make in those fleeting moments can change lives forever. Daniel's hand hesitated on the wallet as the woman's voice broke through the noise of the busy street. It wasn't the request itself that startled him. He had heard those words countless times before from countless strangers. "Please, sir, just a little food." The kind of plea that often melted into the background of daily life, the kind of cry most people walked past without a second thought. But there was something in the way she said it, something fragile and desperate, like the sound of someone who had been carrying the weight of the world for far too long. He looked at her properly now, not just the surface of her ragged clothes and unkempt hair, but at her face. It was pale, almost colorless, and exhaustion painted itself in every line, every expression. Yet what struck him most were her eyes. Brown, deep, familiar brown eyes. For a heartbeat, he thought he was imagining things. His chest tightened as memories began rushing forward uninvited. His mind struggled to place her, like a puzzle piece that almost fit but seemed impossible. And then, in a wave that felt like both recognition and heartbreak, it hit him. Sarah. 15 years vanished in an instant. The years in between, his studies, his career, the new life he built, suddenly blurred, and all that remained clear was the little girl he once knew. Sarah, the one who sat beside him in class, who shared her snacks with him when he forgot his lunch, who had dreams of becoming a teacher. Sarah, the girl who had moved away so suddenly without even a proper goodbye, leaving him with nothing but unanswered questions and a hollow space where their friendship used to be. Now here she was, standing outside his car, shivering in the cold, her hands trembling as they held on to hope that someone, anyone, might help her. Daniel's heart raced, the same way it did when they used to run across the schoolyard together. Only this time, the feeling wasn't excitement. It was shock, sadness, and an overwhelming wave of guilt. How could someone he once knew so well, someone who had once been so full of life, end up here, begging strangers on the street just to eat? For a moment, Daniel's world felt unsteady. He could hear the faint sound of horns in the distance, the hum of the city still pressing forward as though nothing had happened. Yet for him, time had stopped. He stared at Sarah, and she looked back at him without recognition, at least not yet. To her, he was just another man in a car, another chance at a meal. But to him, she was a piece of his past, suddenly standing before him, fragile and broken. His fingers, still resting on his wallet, trembled. At first he thought about giving her the coins he always carried for such moments. But suddenly, the thought of handing her just a few coins felt unbearable, almost cruel. How could he reduce her to just another face on the street when she had once been so much more to him? Daniel's voice caught in his throat, unable to form the words he wanted to say. His mind was filled with questions. Where had she been all these years? What had happened to her? Did she even remember him? Yet none of those words made it past his lips. Instead, he just sat there, staring, his heart pounding with the weight of both recognition and helplessness. This was no longer just a chance encounter. This wasn't a nameless plea from a stranger. This was Sarah, his childhood friend, the person he had once promised to always look out for. And now, fate had brought her back into his life in the most unexpected, heartbreaking way imaginable. The realization struck him like a thunderclap. This moment would change everything. Would you like me to expand Scene 3, The Past Returns, in the same emotional 700-word storytelling style as I've done for Scene 1 and 2? ChatGPT said, the sight of her eyes pulled Daniel into another world, the world of yesterday, where everything was simpler, brighter, and unbroken. In an instant, the weary woman in rags faded from his vision, replaced by the image of a little girl with neatly braided hair and a smile that could light up even the gloomiest afternoon. That girl was Sarah, his best friend, his partner in mischief, and the person who had always believed in him when no one else did. He remembered the long school days when they would share a single notebook because his family couldn't afford more. Sarah would always scoot closer, her handwriting neat and patient, making sure he didn't miss a single word of the lesson. They would sit side by side, whispering jokes when the teacher turned away, dreaming of what they would become when they grew up. Daniel wanted to build things, to be an engineer, while Sarah spoke often of teaching children, of changing lives, with knowledge the way books had changed hers. They were inseparable, their laughter echoing down quiet streets as they walked home together. He remembered how Sarah used to sing softly when she thought no one was listening, her voice sweet and full of hope. He remembered pinky promises made under the shade of the old oak tree by the playground, that they would always be friends, that no matter where life took them, they would never forget each other. But life has a way of breaking promises, even ones whispered so earnestly by children. The day Sarah's family left was burned into his memory like a scar. He was only 12, too young to understand what poverty truly meant, but old enough to feel the ache of losing her. He had run to her house only to find it empty, the door locked, the windows bare. Neighbors had said her family couldn't afford to stay anymore, that they had gone to look for work somewhere far away. There was no goodbye, no chance to hold on, just silence where she used to be. Daniel had waited for a letter that never came, for some sign that she was safe, but the years rolled on and her memory became a soft ache tucked away in the corners of his heart. He grew up, studied, built a career, learned to live without her, though a part of him always wondered what had happened to Sarah. Had she become the teacher she dreamed of? Had she built the life she deserved? He had pictured her in classrooms, smiling in front of students, or walking confidently down city streets, with the kind of joy that comes from a life fulfilled. But reality was crueler than anything he could have imagined. Now she stood in front of him, her childhood dreams stripped away, her face hollowed by hardship, her voice reduced to begging for scraps on the roadside. The girl who once dreamed of shaping young minds was now just trying to survive another day. The contrast between the Sarah of his memories and the Sarah before his eyes cut through him like a blade. Daniel's throat tightened. He wanted to speak, to call her name, to remind her of all the things they once shared. Yet he hesitated. What if she didn't recognize him? What if the years had stolen not just her dreams, but her memories too? He sat frozen, torn between past and present, his mind flooded with images of laughter, of whispered promises, of the friendship that had defined his childhood. And in that moment, the weight of it all pressed down on him, the cruel way life had stolen her future, the painful silence of 15 lost years, and the staggering realization that fate had placed her back in his life, not as the bright young girl he remembered, but as a broken woman on a street corner. The world around him kept moving, the traffic lights shifted, cars honked, strangers hurried past. But for Daniel, everything else faded away. All that remained was Sarah, and the haunting truth that he had found her again, only to see her like this. Daniel sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel as if it might anchor him to the reality he was struggling to accept. His mind screamed the easy option: just drop a few coins into her hand, nod politely, and drive away. That was what most people did, wasn't it? It was the simplest thing, the safest thing. He could let the traffic pull him forward and leave this moment behind as nothing more than another story he would try to forget. But deep inside, Daniel knew he couldn't. Not with Sarah. Not with the girl who had once been his entire world. His hand trembled as he pushed open the car door and stepped out, his shoes pressing against the cold pavement. The noise of the city seemed to dim around him. Sarah lowered her head the moment he approached, her shoulders curling inward as though she expected rejection, as though she had already rehearsed the shame of being turned away. She didn't want him to see her face too closely, didn't want him to witness how far she had fallen. In her silence there was a plea louder than words. Please don't recognize me. Please don't pity me. But Daniel couldn't look away. His eyes blurred with tears as he reached out, hesitating for just a second before placing his hand gently on her shoulder. The warmth of the touch made her flinch, as though she had forgotten what kindness felt like. Her body shook, not just from hunger but from years of carrying the weight of invisibility. Sarah, he whispered, his voice cracking. You're coming with me. You're not alone anymore. For a moment she froze, her eyes widening as if she couldn't believe what she had just heard. And then, like a dam breaking, the tears came. She covered her face with trembling hands, sobs pouring out of her not from hunger, not even from the exhaustion of living on the streets, but from the unbearable relief of finally being seen. Truly seen for the first time in years. Daniel's own heart ached as he pulled her gently into an embrace. Around them, cars honked, people stared, some curious, some indifferent, but none of it mattered. What mattered was that Sarah was no longer invisible, no longer just another forgotten soul lost in the shadows of the city. She was his friend, his childhood companion, and now she was someone he refused to abandon. In that single moment of choice, Daniel knew he had altered the course of both their lives. He hadn't just opened his car window. He had opened a door to dignity, to hope, and to the promise that Sarah's story wasn't over yet. Would you like me to now expand Scene 5, the transformation into the same 700-word emotional style, so it flows as a complete, ready-to-use video script? Daniel guided Sarah gently into his home, his hand never leaving her shoulder as though he feared she might vanish if he let go. She walked hesitantly, her steps slow and unsure, like someone who hadn't crossed a threshold of safety in years. The warmth of the house wrapped around her the moment they entered, a stark contrast to the biting cold of the streets she had grown used to. She looked around nervously, her eyes darting from one corner to another, not out of curiosity, but out of disbelief. She could hardly process that she had been invited into a place of shelter, a place where she was welcome. Daniel wasted no time. He led her to the kitchen and placed a steaming plate of food in front of her. For a moment, Sarah simply stared at it, her hands trembling. Hunger had taught her restraint, taught her to expect too little from life. But when Daniel urged her softly, "Go on, Sarah. Eat," the first spoonful passed her lips and her composure broke. Tears slid silently down her face as she ate, each bite not just filling her stomach but reminding her that she was human. Again, worthy of care, worthy of dignity. After the meal, Daniel gave her fresh clothes, simple but clean, and showed her to the bathroom. When she returned, her hair brushed back, her face washed. The years of suffering still lingered in her tired eyes, but something faint had begun to stir. A spark of the Sarah he remembered, the girl with dreams and laughter, seemed to flicker alive. She caught a glimpse of herself in the hallway mirror and gasped softly, as though she hardly recognized the woman staring back at her. Over the following days, Daniel became her anchor. He helped her find medical care, encouraged her to rest, and gave her space to share her story. Sarah had endured more than anyone should: losses, abandonment, a string of misfortunes that had left her with nothing but her will to survive. Yet through it all, she had never completely lost her kindness. Daniel could see it in the way she smiled shyly when thanking him, in the way she spoke gently even when recounting her pain. She had been battered by life, but the goodness within her had never truly disappeared. And as Sarah slowly regained strength, Daniel found himself changing too. He realized that kindness was not about grand gestures or wealth. It was about showing up for someone when they needed it most. By opening his car window, he hadn't just given Sarah food or shelter. He had given her back a sense of belonging. And in turn, she gave him something even greater, a reminder of what it meant to love without condition, to see beyond the surface and honor the soul within. There were nights when they sat together, reminiscing about their childhood. The oak tree, the shared notebooks, the silly promises of forever. Sarah would laugh softly, her voice no longer cracked by despair but warmed by memory. And in those moments, Daniel saw not just the woman she had become, but the girl he once knew, alive again within her. That simple act of opening his window had turned into a doorway to a second chance for both of them. Sarah rebuilt her life step by step, with Daniel's support, but also with her own resilience. She found work, she regained her confidence, and though the scars of her past remained, she wore them as proof of her strength. And Daniel, in helping her, found his own soul renewed. Compassion was no longer an idea, it was a living force in his life, one that bound him to Sarah in a way that no years apart could ever erase.